Okay, so you know how everyone always talks about like working in a vineyard,
Yeah.
like sunshine and rows of vines and that glass of wine at the end of the workday. But today we're gonna like really get into it, like what it really takes to manage a vineyard as a vineyard supervisor, because
Mm.
it's not always so glamorous, right? It's real work. So, can you kind of set the scene for us? What does a vineyard supervisor actually do all day?
So imagine this. You're not just like watching over people. You're actually in charge of the whole process of growing the grapes, from when you can first see the buds coming out of the ground to harvest. You're basically conducting this whole big orchestra of agriculture.
And like a real orchestra, there's a lot to keep track of.
Mhm.
Our sources mention something called wine frames. What are those, and why are they important for a vineyard supervisor to know about?
Oh yeah, wine frames. Think of them like the scaffolding for your grapevines. Usually they're made of wood or metal. And they basically control how the vines grow. Everything from like how much sun they get to how easy they are to harvest. A vineyard supervisor needs to know how to adjust these frames so that you're getting the best grapes you can. And enough of them, it's kind of an art because how the vines grow in the frame changes how the wine will eventually taste.
Wow, okay, I'm already looking at my wine glass differently. But it can't be easy all the time, can it? What are some of the challenges of this job? Our sources made it seem pretty intense.
Well, the most obvious one is probably Mother Nature, right? You could have a hailstorm right when you're about to harvest and lose months of work. Plus, there's always something trying to eat your grapes or give them a disease. And each pest needs its own solution.
Wow, it's like you need a science degree just to deal with bugs. So, besides nature, what else does a vineyard supervisor have to deal with?
One word, people. You're managing a team of people. A lot of times they're seasonal workers, and they're coming from all kinds of different backgrounds. So you need to be able to talk to all these different people. You're not just a boss. You're a communicator, a mediator, sometimes even a therapist.
Wow. It's amazing how much more goes into it than you'd think. Yeah, it really makes you think about all the work that goes into that bottle of wine, right? So we've got the weather to worry about and all these little ecosystems to balance. And on top of that, you've got a whole team of people to manage. It seems like you need a lot more than just a love of wine to do this job.
Exactly. You need a pretty diverse skill set. And some of it might surprise you. Like, vineyard supervisors need to be really good at thinking critically. Because every choice you make, like when to water or how to get rid of pests, it all affects the grapes, the budget, even how the wine ends up tasting,
It's like they're playing chess.
but with grapes and weather patterns.
Exactly. And you mentioned sustainability before. It feels like everyone's talking about that these days. But what does it actually mean for someone working in a vineyard?
Well, it's not just a trendy word. It's really important for keeping the vineyard healthy in the long run,
Mm.
and for the planet, too. So vineyard supervisors these days are doing things like using less water for irrigation, planting cover crops to stop the soil from washing away, and they're even being smarter about pest control so they don't have to use as many chemicals.
So they're like on the front lines of making the wine industry more eco-friendly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. But with all this stuff to think about, where do you even start? What would you say to someone listening who's like, okay, this sounds awesome, but how do I actually do it?
Well, the cool thing is there's no one right way to become a vineyard supervisor.
Hmm.
Some people start by just working in a vineyard, like doing seasonal jobs during harvest and learning as they go. And then some people go to school for it. They might study viticulture or enology or even business management.
So you can come at it from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good to know. So let's say someone wants to like test the waters before jumping in.
Oh,
What
yeah.
would be a good first step?
I would say volunteering during harvest is always a good idea. It's a
Hmm.
great way to see what the work is like, and you get to meet people who are already in the industry. Plus, a lot of vineyards need help during harvest, so it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's like a working interview,
Exactly.
but with better scenery.
Definitely.
So what about someone who's ready for more than just dipping their toes in?
Well, internships are great for that. You get more structured learning,
Hmm.
and you usually get to take on more responsibility. Plus, it can often lead to a job after you graduate.
That makes sense. Now, we've talked about getting hands-on experience, but what about those certifications we were talking about earlier? How do those fit into all of this?
Certifications are a really good way to show potential employers that you know your stuff.
Hmm.
Like if you have the Certified Specialist of Wine certification,
Yeah,
it tells people that you really understand viticulture and winemaking.
like a stamp of approval.
Exactly.
So it's not just about knowing how to prune a vine anymore.
Right.
You need those credentials too.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more important.
Now, what about technology? I feel like every industry is being transformed by technology these days. Is that happening in vineyards too?
Oh, absolutely. It's called precision viticulture, and it's changing everything.
Precision viticulture.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
So basically, they use sensors to keep track of things like the moisture in the soil. And they fly drones over the vineyards to check on the health of the vines. And then they use all that data to figure out exactly how much goes the water and fertilize.
So it's like high-tech farming.
Exactly.
That's wild. So it's not just about tractors and pruning shears anymore. It's like high-tech gadgets and data analysis. It seems like you need to be good at computers to be a vineyard supervisor these days.
Yeah, technology is definitely becoming more and more important.
But with all this talk about efficiency and technology, what about the art of making wine? Does that get lost in all the data?
That's a really good question.
Ah.
And it's something that a lot of people in the industry are thinking about because technology can definitely help us to grow the best grapes possible. But at the end of the day, it's still a human who decides how the wine's going to taste.
Right.
So a good vineyard supervisor needs to be able to use both. They need to use data to make smart decisions. But they also need to trust their gut and their taste buds.
It's like the best chefs.
Exactly.
They respect the old ways of doing things, but they're not afraid to try new things, too. So what about the future? What do you think is next for vineyard supervisors?
Well, climate change is a big one. It's causing all sorts of unpredictable weather patterns, and it's even changing where grapes can grow.
Wow.
So vineyard supervisors are going to have to be really adaptable. They're going to need to be willing to try new grape varieties, and they're going to need to keep finding new ways to be more sustainable.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
But it's also really exciting. So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired, who wants to get out there and get their hands dirty, or maybe program some vineyard drones, what's one piece of advice you can leave them with?
I would say just follow your curiosity. If
Yeah.
you're interested in wine and you like the idea of working with nature, then go for it. Volunteer at a vineyard, take a class, visit some wineries, talk to people who are already doing what you want to do. You never know what might come from it.
That's great advice. It's not just about finding a job. It's about finding your passion.
Exactly.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about what vineyard supervisors do, the challenges they face, and the skills they need to succeed. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Let me think. We've talked a lot about the technical side of things, but I think it's important to remember the human side too.
Okay.
What qualities do you think make a good leader?
That's a good question.
Because at the end of the day, a vineyard supervisor is a leader.
That's a really good point. I think you need to be passionate. You need to be able to inspire your team. And you need to be able to make tough decisions, especially when it comes to things like sustainability and dealing with the effects of climate change.
Absolutely.
Wow, we covered a lot
Okay.
today, from the vineyard to the glass. It's amazing how much goes into making a bottle of wine.
It really is.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
And to all the vineyard supervisors out there, thank you for all your hard work. That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. See you next time.